Nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it. Our Father, who art in heaven. Seriously? What the actual fuck?
Welcome to Above the Garage. Hi friends, Kate here. Just wanted to remind everyone that we will be back soon with our usual lighter and more fun discussions on a new television show in the very near future. But first, Aubrey and our friends are going to continue with their brilliant post-show analysis of The Handmaid's Tale for this and one additional episode. Also, we are excited to announce that we set up a new online gift shop as a post-show, hopefully somewhat humorous outlet. So make sure to follow us on Instagram to check that out. If it hasn't been announced by the time of this episode dropping, it will be in the next day or two for sure. So make sure to follow us. I will hand it over to Aubrey.
Today is our second in a mini-series of episodes dedicated to our final thoughts about The Handmaid's Tale. As you may know, if you've listened to our Nick and June analysis, these episodes will sound a little different than what you're used to if you've been listening to us for a while. There will be a mix of prepared statements and minimally edited discussions covering a range of topics. Today, we're going to analyze our panelists' thoughts on feminism, then take a look at Luke's character both on his own and in comparison to Nick. We have a segment on history and politics, and we will conclude with notes on some noticeable shifts that we've seen within the show's final season. So before we get started, let's do a round of introductions for today's panelists.
Hi, I'm Marigold.
Hi, I'm Scarlett.
Hi, I'm Rachel.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, I'm Tina.
And I'm Aubrey.
So first off, we thought it was important to define what feminism is versus radical feminism because there's a whole range of it. So feminism is focused on dismantling gender-based inequality, not on creating division between genders, and it advocates for the idea that everyone, regardless of gender, should have equal access to rights, resources, and opportunities, and that restrictive gender norms should be challenged for the benefit of all people. Versus the definition for radical feminism, or radfems as we sometimes say, radical feminists view society fundamentally as a patriarchy in which all men dominate and oppress women. Radical feminists seek to abolish the patriarchy in a struggle to liberate women and girls from an unjust society by challenging existing social norms and institutions. So we are going to talk about those themes in the show.
What I kind of wanted to say about it was that I kind of enjoyed for the past seasons the different themes that they gave us in terms of women. Like, for example, season 4, I think it talked a lot about rage, and obviously we saw it, how the season ended with June killing Fred and stuff like that. But then in this season, I kind of felt like a shift in terms of the message. It was more of a all men are bad, all women are good, especially because I started seeing how they were trying to redeem Serena. And even when they're trying to redeem Serena, like if you really analyze the character, she does evolve a little bit, but she doesn't. Because in the end, everything she does is, when she's asking for June's forgiveness is because she needs it. She needs it to feel better about herself. So even when she's talking about the handmaids, and even when she realized because she went slightly through it, she still believes in the system. So for me, it's really hard to align myself to a woman that thinks like that in real life is just literally going to sell me, throw me under the bus. So I understand that part of being a feminist is being a girl's, but how can you be a girl to somebody that's going to completely go against your freedom, your independence, it's going to rape you, it's going to and then you don't see throughout the seasons this whole redemption arc that they're trying to sell me.
Yeah, I mean, in episode 1, like on the train, when she was like, America was full of whores, and then in episode 6, when June finds her writing, like she still felt, vindicated in what she did. And the whole Juliet storyline, like that they've been pushing for season 5 and season 6, like it felt so contrived to me. Like it felt like they were trying to mirror both of their journeys, and I just didn't like it because June and Serena are they're similar people, but they're different. And I just didn't like that they were trying to, I don't know, have this like same journey for the two of them. And like you said, I know like feminism is like about supporting women, but I don't think we should just support women just because. And I feel like the show has become more of like a radical feminism show where men are vilified and women are given forgiveness regardless of what they do. And it's just been a disappointing message, and especially in, the climate today. So yeah, I agree with you.
I agree with you. It was kind of disappointing in this last season, seeing the constant, you know, all commanders are bad. You're just like the rest of them. I think that got thrown in twice, I think. And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, we've seen these two commanders not portrayed like all the other commanders. And we've also seen men in Gilead, guardians that have helped, that are part of Mayday. And then at the end, we get this message where, all men are bad, all commanders are bad. I'm sorry. And I'm like, well, that's not what you sold me throughout the other seasons. Now you're pushing this narrative even in interviews. And then when we got to episode 10, I was kind of confused because June says to Tuello, captain, and then he says, actually, commander. I was like, wait a minute. Why? Okay,
What's the message?
what's the message? And then when June meets with Emily, she's like, I had a good commander, or my commander was a friend. And it's like, okay, well, which is it? I understand that commanders are the top tier and they're the ones that pretty much control what's going on, but you need people in the inside to be able to bring the system down. The system's not going to fall just from people from the outside. And it's really hard for me to think that there's no good people in any of the positions of Gilead. Because then talking about feminism, we twisted around. What about the wives? There were wives that were good. I think it was season 1. Emily says, she has this interaction with his wife, and you can see the wife trying to postpone the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure there were wives that were not as horrible as Naomi or as Serena.
Yeah, you've got Eleanor too.
Exactly. Good call. But Serena didn't have to abuse June. She chose to abuse June because that's the only power that she had. So I can't see Serena as a victim.
No.
Even though she was a victim of Fred and she was a victim of her own consequences. I can understand that. But she chose Gilead over and over again.
Yeah, and to what you were saying at the beginning there about the line, you're just like the rest of them. That was said to lump Nick and Wharton into the same category, which is an insane thing to do because June said that to Nick, and then in the next episode, Serena said that to Wharton.
Exactly.
Nick reacted to something under extreme terror, and Wharton took that information and killed a bunch of women. How are we putting them into the same box?
I don't know.
Because of what you're saying. I think it's because the men bad, women good, no matter what they've done, which is very harmful.
I think that's a dangerous message. Like in this political climate, you can see the pushback of men. I mean, we've all dealt with shitty men, and men can be extremely shitty, but their experiences are their own, and our experiences are our own. So I think, like, at least for me, I don't think the patriarchy is just about men being evil, because I think the patriarchy also affects them. It affects us more because we're lower to them. That's what a patriarchy is. But the system also affects how they're perceived, how they act, how they, evolve in a society. And that also pushes, like, example, emotion. Like, men are not supposed to express emotion because they're seen as weak. So how do we expect men to be emotionally intelligent if society is punishing them for being emotional and they're not giving them the tools to be emotional people or in tune with their emotions? So people have to start thinking about that. Patriarchy just not only affects women, it also affects men. And I don't think that a lot of people are kind of open to that dialogue. And it's sad because we're just pushing each other away instead of trying to have happy medium.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen like examples of it, like when Moira is in Canada and she's working at the refugee center, there was a gay man that he was in the army, and when Gilead took over, they made all of them soldiers for Gilead. And, men are in this comply or die situation in Gilead. And what really bothered me in episode 10 was when June said to Holly that she needs to go back to Gilead to keep all the little girls safe. And I get that the message is about women and that men aren't the focus of this show, but why do we have to, like, it doesn't have to be either or. We don't have to just save the women. Like you said, patriarchy affects and hurts little boys too. And these little boys won't have freedom to choose what they want to be either in Gilead society. And I don't know, Margaret Atwood also said, like, Gilead is beyond just the power structures of men and women. It's about those at the top too versus those at the bottom. So
I actually have the Margaret Atwood quote, which was posted on Twitter, where she says, "It's not just women who are controlled in the book, it's everyone except those at the top. Gilead is not a theocratic totalitarianism, not simply a men have power, women do not world. Lower status men are told when and who to marry." So that was her. That was a direct quote from her, from the author of the book.
So yeah, that whole line in episode 10, like, it just really bothered me because I also feel like they were trying to push June as, because Mom Holly was saying, like, oh, her daughter should know that her mom's a warrior. And I understand the show is about fighting, but at the same time, like, I don't know, women are tired of fighting too. Women can, care for their families and still fight back. I felt like June is going to abandon Holly, and like her being a warrior should make up for that in a way, which I don't know.
Which is what Holly did.
Yeah.
That's what Holly was taken back when she was like, can somebody else go to fight? Because she realized that she had lost. I mean, she was trying to build a better world for her daughter and for her granddaughters, of course, and it didn't happen. Everything went to shit, obviously. But then she realized that she could have had that time with her, and she didn't. So I liked that mother-daughter relationship. That was one of the things that I enjoyed a lot in this season, was that reunion.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really wanted to see that, for Holly to see the woman that June had become in the end. But then, those little lines here and there were like a little too pushy for me to that area. So I agree with you.
Yeah. And something else I noticed, I don't know if you guys ever picked up on this, but that in Gilead, the people who are in Gilead, so Serena and Nick, both had boy babies versus the handmaids that, Janine and June both had girl babies. And I feel like it's this like subtle like narrative that, like, if you're in Gilead, like, you're having a boy and they're evil, like, versus the handmaids are having these girls. And I don't know if you guys ever picked up on that, but I was like, oh, that's weird that Serena's having a boy, Nick's having a boy, and they're both part of Gilead. I don't know if that was a message that they were trying to give to the audience, but
Yeah, it's interesting now that I think about it. I also wanted to talk about, obviously, in general terms, we know that feminism is about equality. And I think that a lot of people maybe think that what we're looking for as women is to be equal to men. And I think that's a mistake, because we're not equal to men. We are different. And that's fine. The whole purpose of feminism is to have equal opportunities in life and motherhood, fatherhood, work, school, education, liberty, freedom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But those opportunities don't look the same because we are not the same. So if we strive to be exactly the same, we're also going to be pushing each other apart. So it's just that I feel that sometimes these messages kind of like make the problem bigger.
yeah.
Because they just get like boxed in these little categories instead of thinking about, well, how does this affect me and how does this affect a man, for example, but everything is just made that way to just push that narrative, the media, the books, like the news, everything. And it's just like, it's really complicated to navigate the world as a woman and not knowing how it is to navigate the world as a man, because we don't have that experience, and vice versa. Like, they're never going to understand us because they don't have those experiences. So
yeah, I really like that you said that, because I feel like just like creates a bigger division between men and women, where like our differences like could be celebrated and they could like complement each other really well. Like, for instance, even like in this story, like Nick and June, like, it doesn't have to be just a female protagonist like fighting by herself to make it a feminist show. Like, she can have a male ally, and it doesn't take anything away from June and her fighting in her story. So I kind of feel like they killed Nick off partly because they didn't want that love story there. They didn't want Nick to take some of that attention away.
Yeah.
Where like I feel like if they had done it well, if they had written it well, they really could have enhanced June's story, and it wouldn't have, I don't think it would have been anti-feminist at all to have a male ally like fighting alongside her. So,
well, and it used to be that way in the early seasons, right? I mean, that was who he was portrayed as
in the book, in both books, actually.
and in the books. Yeah.
That's who he was. That's why, I mean, I know that obviously we all go to social media and people are like, well, they changed the book, they changed the book. I understand that they changed the book, but at least for me, from my perspective, I didn't think they were going to change that part of the book.
A whole main character?
No, like, because it was canon in both books. So it's like, if you were going to deviate so much from the books, at the end you could have just had June with Hannah.
oh yeah.
Because that's what a lot of people that haven't read the books were expecting, because that was a big topic in the book. And for me, having the end of the book say that Nick was Mayday and then having it in the testaments as well was like something that they were not going to change. And then, because of a few interviews, it's kind of like people don't know if Nicole, Daisy, Holly are going to be the actual Nicole, Daisy, Holly, which is this Nicole that we're seeing in the show.
Nick and June's daughter, right?
Nick and June's daughter. So it's like, so you decided to just completely kill that character off, like no testaments, no nothing, and do a completely different outtake on what was written on the books, when it didn't seem, at least to me from my perspective, that that's the route that he was going, even when you made him a commander. Because what better way to be higher on the top and be working for the resistance than being a commander? So that's also very curious to me, like why they decided to just scrap that and then give Lawrence, his redemption arc, and not Nick, when Lawrence wasn't even in the book. And don't get me wrong, I love Lawrence's character as well, but that's kind of like contradicting to me as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of like hardcore fans have read the Testaments, and I personally haven't, but I feel like that's a central storyline to the book is
Yep.
Daisy and Hannah, like, and them reuniting too. So like, I don't know, it just seems like why would you take away like such a good storyline like that? I mean, it sounds like it could have been made into really good television as well. So
True.
One thing Megan said that I thought was really good about the topic of how damaging it is to say men are bad, all men are bad in Gilead. She said, the all men are bad in Gilead and undeserving of redemption or grace idea means there's no room for men to make a change for the better. They only give grace and allow change if you're a woman in Gilead. If you're a man, there's no grace for you. There's no chance of change. So I thought that was well worded.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's a good point. If you present this idea that we're not, it almost gives people an excuse to not bother, to not try to be better.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, what do we always say? Like, all men are the same. They're pieces of shit. You can't trust them and cheat on you. Like, so if a man is genuinely trying, he's just going to be like, what for? That's exactly what you're saying. But then they keep doing it. But the problem is that they keep doing it. And it's like, yeah, it's very complicated to just like summarize it up, because it's a clusterfuck, and it's our fault too, and a lot of women don't want to hear that.
I think one thing that is maybe common ground on a lot of these sorts of issues is that, like social issues, I guess, is that there's a core problem that starts out, which is that men have historically been pretty shitty to women. Like that's where we're starting from. The problem is the pendulum swings too far the other way, and people become blind to like the real solution, which like, I don't know that that's always a bad thing, because I think like that's kind of what has to happen at the beginning is like, we need to push women because they're so far below men in a lot of situations, not getting the same pay, not being respected, So I understand the kind of desire to be like, let's focus on that. I think that's a good thing. But then at a certain point, you have to go like, cool, that's great, let's keep doing that, but also we need to teach men
how to accept that,
and also how to support women in a way that's actually productive. And I think, I mean, it's still their fault if they're going to be defensive about it. If they're going to be defensive about a woman like having an opportunity, of course that's still like a horrible thing.
What I was going to say is like, but what does society tells a man to expect from a woman? Society tells a man to expect from a woman to stay home, have kids, and take care of him because we are nurturing. Then you have a woman that's home taking care of the kids and she doesn't feel nurtured. because you don't teach a man to nurture a woman because that's the woman's job.
Yeah.
So when the world changes and women start realizing that they are more than mothers, because motherhood is great for those that want to be mothers, but you are not just a mother. You just don't become a mother and that's all you are. You're a friend, a lawyer, a sister, whatever you are, and a mother. That's an extra thing that you have to do, not a chore, but it's just another thing that you do.
It's a facet of your personality, not the whole person.
Mm-hmm.
That's all society gives you, is like, once you're a mother, and once you're a mother, they say that everything is beautiful and everything is perfect because you've reached motherhood. And it is not, because society is not built, even though society asks you and expects you to be a mother, society is not built for that unless you want to stay home. So when women started realizing that they wanted to do other things, society didn't kind of like got up to par to that. There's no childcare for women, for career women. You have to pay that out of pocket. Then you have to go home, you have to cook, you have to clean, you work 40 hours because the economy sucks. And then you're not teaching men how to be nurturing because you don't expect that. Men provide and protect, which for me is the most ironic thing at all, because what are men protecting you from? Other men.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not walking in the street, and I'm not saying that women cannot be violent or criminals. That's not what I'm saying. But unfortunately, men are more aggressive than women. And there's a reason why. Again, it goes back to not regulating your emotions and always thinking that that is a core of your masculinity, is to be aggressive. So you have all those emotions bottled up, frustrations, and you can't get them out. You're going to get them out as aggression. If you think that a woman is your property because that's what the patriarchy is telling you, unfortunately, that's what it's going to like reflect in.
That's the target of the aggression. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's the problem is the patriarchy, the gender roles. And I think that religion had a lot to do with those gender roles and those traditional values and how it's seen, because this is not new. This has been happening since Abrahamic religions became into existence, because they are patriarchal in their foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think too, like with men, like we don't allow them to be emotional and allow them to be sad. And like I think about like even Nick in this show, when he in episode 6 like wants to get comfort from June when he's sad over, you know, that he had to kill that guardian. Like it takes her aback. And Nick has been a character that has been bottling up his emotions for so long, and it just kind of like takes her, you know, takes her aback to see him so emotionally expressive. So I think that's something too, that we don't allow men to express all ranges of emotion. Society says it's okay to express your anger, but you know, when they're sad, men are just told to like suck it up, you know. So I see that in Nick too.
Don't be a girl.
Yeah.
Don't be a girl, because we're allowed to be emotional. We're not allowed to be aggressive.
Yeah, exactly.
But men are allowed to be aggressive, but not emotional. Like, we're human. We all have the same emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know we had some comments too on possible ways that the show is giving off a harmful message about abuse and sexual assault. And we've been pretty uncomfortable with the way they've handled the
Like the portrayal of like,
yeah, and in quotes like relationship, like I don't want to use that term exactly, but
yeah.
the relationship between a survivor and abuser in situations of sexual assault, emotional abuse, or physical abuse. And obviously, Serena is the most glaring representation of that, June and Serena.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I know like the showrunners and writers say that they do like thorough research on like refugees and sexual assault and other sensitive subjects, but I really find that hard to believe when they just, you know, continue to put June with her abuser, the woman who sexually assaulted her, who stole her child, who beat her. And I know that they're trying to show like the reality of it being messy and that people don't always operate logically in these situations, but I feel like they should still have responsibility in how they approach these topics. And like, for instance, like even June helping Serena give birth, I think that would be very traumatizing to watch. You know, after this woman has tried to steal your baby, you have to help her give birth to her own baby. And just continually pushing this quote unquote Juliet story. I'm okay with June, you know, forgiving Serena, but I just feel like they didn't handle it with the care that they should have.
I think they don't make the distinction clear about, maybe in quotes, forgiving someone in the sense of for yourself, like for your own ability to process what's happened to you, versus doing that as a kindness to the person who hurt you.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
And this whole time you've got Serena begging June to forgive her, like, you know, essentially thinking, we're friends and why can't you just forgive me? And so even if maybe there's part of that for June processing in her forgiveness of Serena, they present it like it's something that Serena's asking for and June is offering to her abuser.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
To send the message that that's what you should do, or that
like it puts the responsibility on the victim
Yes.
to have to extend forgiveness. And like I still don't believe we've seen like a genuine shift in Serena. Like I do think she feels some remorse, but I don't know. I haven't seen enough of it to see that she's genuinely like if she could go back in time, she would never do it again.
No, I mean, all we've heard is her saying that she would do it all over again, like she said in
Yeah.
season 5. And like you can kind of sense that she feels that same way at the end of the season, at the end of the show, when she's with Noah and
Yeah.
you're the best thing ever. And you know, it's kind of like you get the sense that she would go through this whole journey again.
Yeah.
To have that outcome.
Yeah, definitely.
And even if she was completely remorseful and had turned her whole life around, you know, good for her. Hopefully she's punished for it in some way, learns her lesson, but also good riddance. Like, why does June have to accept her and want to spend one more second with the person who did that to her? That should be a separate thing for Serena to reckon with.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to twist June up in the process of Serena having an arc and having some kind of, you know, I don't even know if I want to use the word redemption, just having some kind of personal awakening or whatever it is that she might be vaguely experiencing on some level. June has no responsibility, like you said, to have anything to do with that.
So they don't have to be friends and raise Noah and Nicole together. Like, I mean, I can understand her kind of like helping Serena give birth and pushing her off the train so they didn't kill Noah. I can understand those things, you know, because like she says in episode 5, you know, I'm not you. And that marks a difference between who June is and who Serena is, even though they're trying to make this journey be parallel to each other.
But I think they could have done the same thing with June showing that empathy to all the other people that she loves.
Of course, yeah. Of course.
And not with her abuser, which is the part where it becomes very, very shady as to how people are going to feel about that.
I think we talked about this when we were talking about Nick's character. Like, they never showed us neither Nick or Lawrence doing something visually that you could not recover from. Yes, Lawrence was the creator of the colonies. A lot of people died because of him. Nick joined the Sons of Jacob, and you know, he probably did some shitty shit that we didn't see. But Serena had specific things. Maybe if they wouldn't have presented certain things, maybe the impression of the audience wouldn't be so clear cut. And like, I don't think she deserves redemption. Besides that, for me, she hasn't redeemed herself. Like her, oh my God, how do you say that word in fucking English? Sorry. Arrepentimiento.
Repentance.
Yeah. I don't see her as repentant as she should be. Like
remorseful.
Yes.
Yeah. Nailed it.
I know she understands that she did horrible things, but it's like you said, would she go back and do these same things? I mean, when she sees a handmaid, she's like, I'm fertile. Like, we don't need a handmaid. New Bethlehem is not going to have handmaids, and I don't want to go back to Gilead. But whatever happens in Gilead with the handmaids, sure, they should retire to the fertility center that I'm making. Like, I'm sorry, what? So you're okay with other people getting raped, because that is still rape, as long as you don't have to see it, you don't have to experience it. How is that redeeming when everybody's asking Nick to join the rebellion. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we have to be kind of equal. And I don't see that. I don't see that remorse,
No.
and at the end, which it's going to hurt me to say, she's always asking June to forgive her. But in the end, in the episode 10, she doesn't ask her for forgiveness. She just says that she's sorry. And I know this was all Yvonne because I think she nailed that scene.
Yeah.
I felt it and I hate to admit it, but I did feel that in that scene, she did feel sorry for what she did.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was because she wasn't asking. But then you see the end and it's like you got what you wanted. In the end, you still got what you wanted.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that was really interesting what you just brought up about the scene with Wharton where she, on their wedding night, where she sees the handmaid in the house and she says, I'm fertile. It's like, well, what if you weren't? Would you be okay with this then? You know what I'm saying? Like,
probably. She'd probably still be going after Nicole.
Is this what's changed her mind? Is because now she can have babies and so this isn't a concern for her anymore? That's the only thing that's made her change? I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's why she told June also where the commanders were. It's convenient for her as well. Now she doesn't have to deal with Wharton, with her new husband.
Right. He wasn't really a delight anyway. Like, it's no loss.
I don't think if Serena would have, so if she hadn't gone to the Wheelers, if Fred hadn't been killed, like if none of the bad things happened, if she didn't face any consequences of her actions, I don't know if she would have even shown a little bit of remorse, maybe a little bit, but like I think that having to be put in June's shoes for just like a fraction of sorry, I was about to say the word and it came out in June speak.
There's no other way to say it once you've heard it that way.
I know.
Exactly.
But like I think the only reason why she feels any remorse is because she had to be put in a similar situation to June. I think it made her realize that because she finally had to experience the consequences, if you know what I'm saying.
For
so.
for like a day and a half.
Yeah.
For an episode and a half.
In the Wheelers' house in Canada.
Yeah.
Why weren't the Whalers at the wedding?
I know, right?
They didn't get the invite, got lost in the mail. So we've talked a few times throughout this conversation and over other episodes, I think, too, just about how Serena becoming a mother is used in a way on the show that seems to imply that changes her fundamentally from a villain to someone with empathy. And I think that there are a lot of problems with that, obviously. But there was a really interesting article on The Conversation talking about why Hulu's The Handmaid's Tale failed as feminist television. And it gets into some of that about the way the show views motherhood. And we just wanted to talk about that for a minute, I think.
Yeah, one of the main points in the article was that childless women in the show are portrayed as like bitter spinsters or wicked stepmothers. And like you were saying, even with Serena and the wives within Gilead, you see a lot of them, their status is dependent upon their either fertility status or if they have children.
But I think the Serena redemption, or because she's a mother, I think it's important to talk about it because she did everything she did because she wanted a child of her own. And that also pushes the narrative in this society and in Gilead that the most important thing a woman can do is be a mother.
Right.
And I've said before, you become a mother, you're not just a mother. Being a mother is just another thing that you do. It's very different when you're a father, like you're still John that plays golf with the guys, the CPA or whatever you do. But when you're a mom, you're a mom. You're so-and-so's mom.
Yeah.
And that's what society pushes.
Well, and they even have June at the end, and I think it's in the finale. Yeah, it's in the finale when she's talking to Serena, and Serena's not sure what she's going to do with her life now, and she's holding Noah, and June just says, "Well, just be his mother." Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's pretty, I don't know.
What if you can't be a mother?
Not that that's not enough, but yeah, what if you can't be a mother? What if that's not your goal? What if that's not something that you have an interest in being? And what if you're actually a woman who struggles with this? Like, what is the message that we're sending here by saying that being able to have a child, for one thing, redeems you, apparently, and also gives you a purpose that's apparently held above all other purposes in life that you could possibly have?
Or fixes everything.
Yeah, so like a couple of the quotes from this article that I just wanted to read here. So it says, in particular, the series idealizes white biological mothers while demonizing or marginalizing other female figures. So then it goes on to say, Atwood's novel focuses chiefly on the horror of the rape and forced impregnation of the handmaids, But Hulu's adaptation gives more weight to the theme of maternal loss and the handmaid's desire to keep their biological offspring. Although The Handmaid's Tale succeeds as a compelling female-centered drama, unlike Atwood's novel, it foregrounds the rights of biological mothers over the issue of women's reproductive choice. While Atwood criticized forced impregnation, Hulu's Handmaid's Tale became increasingly invested in an idealized view of white natural mothers that is oppressive to many women. And then, yeah, just what we were just saying is also echoed here, where it says the moral worth attached to fertile and infertile women in the series is even more evident in the treatment of Serena, as we were talking about. In the novel, Serena is an outspoken advocate for traditional female roles. The series takes this further. It shows baby-crazed Serena actively creating the laws of Gilead and the handmaid system to obtain a child. Now pregnant, Serena finds herself at the mercy of another angry, infertile woman who wants to steal her baby. Once pregnant, Serena mellows and becomes a more sympathetic character. This evolution can be seen to reinforce the idea that infertile women are unfulfilled, unhappy women who can only be redeemed through pregnancy and childbirth.
The article is also touching on the race problem of the show.
Yep.
Yeah. But I do like the spin of like Serena was redeemed because she was a mom. Not because she was a mom, but because that's what Elizabeth Moss said in an interview, like I have empathy for Serena because of Noah, because she's a mother, because, like that's why I didn't want her killed on the first episode. So it's just like, okay, cool.
I guess that makes up for everything because you have the ability to have children.
I'm a mom too. I don't expect to, incarcerate people and have people rape people so that other people can have babies. Like,
yeah. So, yeah, I just find that to be as a point I hadn't considered. And it's a really good point. And I think that's maybe something that subconsciously has bothered me about the way the show ended, but I wasn't able to really put my finger on it. And I think they really hit it in this article. So yeah, so it's the conversation. If anybody wants to read the rest of it, but yeah, that was just something I thought it was important to bring up while we're talking about feminism and these other topics today.
I was just going to add that I think that idea that unfertile women are bitter is something that, again, the media has pushed. When we see movies, when we see,
childless cat ladies.
Yeah.
And it's, there's this not competition, but you see like the battles on social media about like women that are happy child free and the other side that says like so many women that want to have children. And I think all of that just stems from the pressure that the patriarchy puts on women to be mothers. Like mothers are supposed to be revered, but we are in a power imbalance in a patriarchal society. We're supposed to give birth and have babies, but the world is not catered for us to do that. Like we can't be corporate women and be mothers. We can't, like, it's just the clusterfuck of contradictions, I guess.
Well, and when there's that pressure of like, that's what is expected of you, then when you can't do that or when you don't want that,
you're wrong.
You're like pushed down for that. Yeah. And you feel bad about yourself. Like, I'm not worthy. I'm not, enough because I either can't or don't want to have kids.
I think it's worse when you can't because society's putting that pressure on you that you can't. And then someone can go as crazy as Serena Waterford and create a fucked up world just because that same world is putting that pressure on, like, you are not going to be fulfilled until you can be a mother, because technically that's why we're put on this earth, I guess.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
That or just feel so bad about yourself for something that's not in your control and feel like less than because of that. That's awful. It's an awful thing to like make people feel.
And even if you can be a mother, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be a mother. Just because you're a woman, you're not born with that nurturing, situation. There's women that are horrible mothers, unfortunately.
Yeah, or you have other goals that take precedent over that and you don't want to have a child be just like an afterthought. Many, many reasons why you would choose to or not be able to. And yeah, it's weird because I feel like the whole original formation of Gilead being somewhat based on fertility crisis, and then the end of the show being like, hey, you can have babies. Now your arc is completed. And it's like,
yeah, that's a good point.
Wasn't the beginning of the show the complete opposite of this, saying like we shouldn't be creating systems where we're raping women to get babies, but then at the end we're saying like, well, now you have I don't know. It's just a very strange, almost like Gilead was right or something at the end. It feels weird.
Yeah.
The circle.
Yeah. I mean, like they were trying to say like in New Bethlehem when they had all those ambassadors or whatever that like they did the right thing, and okay, maybe Gilead did some things right, but rounding up all the fertile women wasn't the right thing. So,
No. So I know Marigold wanted to talk about a very questionable scene from season 4, episode 7, involving Luke and June.
yes. So, this scene has bothered me ever since I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it happened, but because of how the writers and showrunners have described it. So the episode is 407. It's called Home, and it's written by Yalan Chang. So I found the script online, so I'm going to read directly from it because I think it's important how this writer wrote the scene. So Luke is still asleep. June enters empowered, high off her confrontation with Serena. Fuck Serena and her pregnancy, fuck Gilead, fuck being a handmaid. They can't control her anymore. No one can. She feels like a glorious monster. She goes to Luke. Hungry, she starts kissing him. He starts to wake up, confused and disoriented. Luke says, "Hey, what time is it?" But she won't answer, she won't talk. She keeps kissing him, her hands on him. She wants one thing. He's a little freaked out. He doesn't understand. He doesn't recognize her. She pulls off his shirt. She pushes him down. She pulls off his pants, his underwear. She climbs on top of him. Luke says, "Wait." But she won't wait. She'll fuck him the way she fucked Nick. Nothing gentle or sweet or tender. Rough Gilead sex. Luke says, "June." He's trying to slow her down, trying to bring her back to be someone he recognizes. But she'll never be that person again. Luke continues, "June, wait." She puts a hand over his mouth and the scene cuts out. So, well, first off, comparing the sex to Nick and June, it's nothing like that.
No.
First off, the sex she had with Nick was consensual. Yes, it was rough, but that doesn't mean that.
Well, and it was only one of their scenes that was like that. Anyway, I was like,
Yeah.
They had a sexual relationship that encompassed a lot of different types of sex.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just that, and they showed us that. And when it was that, like you said, it was consensual and everybody was into it.
Yes.
Big difference.
Yeah. So it's to me, it's mind blowing that she would compare this rape, because this is rape, to the consensual sex that she had with Nick. And so to backtrack, I want to just read an article about the rape that happened to June when she was 9 months pregnant. I believe it was season 2, episode 10. And this was also written by Yalan Chang. So I found 2 different articles that describe June's rape versus Luke's rape and how the writers view it differently. So in the Hollywood Reporter, Yalan Chang said that she wanted to depict how brutal and terrible rape really is. "I wanted to give the sense that for all ceremonies in Gilead that are happening every month, like, what do you think is happening? What is really happening? It is rape. It is always horrible and terrible. This show is about misogyny, and the history of misogyny is fundamentally all about control over women's bodies. Given that context, why wouldn't they do this ceremony? As the ceremony begins for the first time, Offred openly and vocally resists the Waterfords, screaming out in protest to no avail. Both Waterfords are taken aback by Offred's reaction, which prompts Fred to arrange Offred and Hannah's reunion the next morning. It really shocks them, says Chang. It catches them by surprise because they've done the ceremony 100 times, and that's not how this is supposed to go. The fact that she actually is a woman with agency over her own body and might have her own reaction, that doesn't compute. It doesn't make any sense in this context. I feel like it was important to show that this has always been rape and that it's always this terrible for the handmaids. It's always this brutal, and it's just that the handmaids have been trained to not let you, the viewer, see it and to make it easy on people, but it's not easy on them. It's terrible for them." So that's the end of that article in regards to June's rape. I'll read this next article that Yalan Chang said in regards to season 4, episode 7 with the June and Luke rape scene. Yalan told Refinery 29 that we all want a fairy tale ending for June. I really, really do. Is it realistic given what this particular character has gone through, given her years in Gilead and all the trauma and violence that has infused her life there, and some of which she has been forced to inflict? That on this particular day, right after she left Gilead, that she could instantly snap into a super healthy and tender, intimate relationship with Luke? The answer to Yalin's question, as the scene proves, is a hard no. The writer and producer recognizes as much after speaking with psychologists and trauma experts on the hypotheticals of June's experience. Is it more honest to the characters that the issues of power and dominance, along with just the thrill of escapism, have creeped into her relationship to sex? Yalin continued. And that sex might be more enmeshed with some of those issues rather than being about an intimate, loving connection with the husband you haven't seen in years. So for me as a viewer, it's really hard that these writers keep giving June a free pass in regards to her actions. Like in the first article, we see Yellen talk about the agency that June finally has in a rape scene, which I understand. But at the same time, like, of course, I agree with Yellen that June isn't going to have a healthy relationship with sex.
I think my issue, and maybe what part of what your concern is about the scene, is just that I don't think we have any particular problems with them viewing June this way, or with them showing these aspects of her trauma, or these aspects of like her, I guess, in quotes, healing, or how things would be for her after. But it's the way that they don't make her still responsible for her own actions.
Yes.
Like you can have, like, of course it makes sense that she would be a little bit fucked up from all of this. Like that makes complete sense, and is something that's both true and raw, and something that we would want to explore if we're trying to tell a real story that real women can relate to. But that doesn't mean that you don't have any accountability.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I think them trying to say that this isn't rape is because the June and Luke scene in episode 7 of season 4 isn't rape. I think part of them pushing that is because they don't want this to be a point of shame for June, I guess, or like something that she has to reckon with in herself. And I think that's, like you said, it makes June this like God in the eyes of the people who are writing this, and just it elevates her above the responsibility of the other characters in the show. Like we're saying that she can do whatever she wants because of her trauma. That's not fair. And that's in a lot of different situations where we're giving her, like, we're saying, it's different because it's June. And when you analyze it, you're like, it's literally the same thing that somebody else has done in the show. And it's her. So we're viewing it like they have put her on this pedestal of viewing her like this God that like can do the same things other people do. And it's like, oh, but it's different in her case.
Yeah. I feel like they give June a free pass because of her trauma. Like I understand writing, like you said, like writing trauma survivors in a realistic way. Like she said, like she's not going to have, a loving, intimate relationship with Luke
necessarily. Yeah.
Post Gilead, like one day after Gilead. However, and I guess this goes back to the whole June centricism of the show, is that yes, she's the main character, but I feel like they give her more grace than they do other characters. And I know that we don't have time to fully explore each character within the show, and I know she's the protagonist, but it's harmful to me that the writers won't even call the scene rape. They just call it rough. Like Yalin Chang wrote it as rough Gilead sex. Like, no. It's not.
Nope.
It did not come off to me as rough sex. It didn't come off to me at all as consensual sex. So all I see is June holding down Luke's hand, covering his mouth, and continuing to rape him after he asks June to stop multiple times.
Yep.
And again, I feel like it ties into this theme of feminism or sexism, that men get raped just like women do, whether you're married or not. And I understand they're trying to show that June is fucked up about sex, but for the showrunners and writers, not to label it what it is. not rough sex. It was rape. Like, even if Luke is married to June, and even if in under different circumstances he wanted to have sex with June, but this scene has just always bothered me. And then like it always set a tone for me that they don't fully grasp what that sexual assault or consent piece looks like. And it made me a little bit hesitant that they understood that topic in this show.
Yeah. I mean, a single instance of consent is not consent forever.
Yes.
It's consent for that instance.
Yeah.
It's also troubling because it's the other way around. If it would have been,
yes,
Luke doing that to June, or Fred doing that to June, or Nick doing that to June, it would have been rape. No questions asked. And when the scene came out, I remember the social media commentary was, some people thought it was rape. Some people thought she was empowering herself. Some people even thought like, well, that's her husband. I'm like, do people not know that it was legal for a husband to rape his wife till what, 50, 70 years ago? Like, you couldn't say no because that was your duty.
Yeah.
So for me, that was like a callback to those, but the way that it was kind of portrayed, I agree with you. It was kind of not right at all, because it is what it is. It's rape.
Yeah.
Yep. If you get verbal and physical cues from someone that they don't want you to continue, it doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what relationship you had before or after that. That is rape.
Yeah. And I just hope, I mean, I personally won't be consuming any TV shows or movies that these writers put out going forward, just because of how I disagree with how they ended the show. But I just hope that going forward that they take, real life people into consideration when writing sexual assault. And I just don't feel like they took as much care as they should have with this topic. And obviously it's a very important topic. So I just wanted to add that piece.
Yes, definitely.
It's interesting because do you guys remember that there was this scene that they wanted to do between Fred and Serena when they were in Canada?
Yeah.
And Joseph Fiennes was firmly against it,
Mm-hmm.
that it was not necessary. So it's kind of interesting how I do think they've done their research for certain things, but then for others it's kind of like murky in a way.
Yeah.
I remember the scene where June meets Hannah in the lake house. That was an amazing scene, and I know they did a lot of research on it, and it hit. But then just that one, just I don't know what happened after season 4.
Yeah. Scarlett, I think you had something you wanted to say about Nick and his relationship with his mom.
Yeah, they talk about his mom this season, and for me it was interesting. He talks about his mom, and we find out that his mom left him and his brother when he was 11. So that's kind of harsh, because usually women don't abandon their kids, especially if it's an abusive household. So it was really surprising to me that the 2 times that he spoke about his mother, he doesn't speak about his mother in a resentful way.
No, he doesn't.
It seemed to me that he kind of understood why his mom left, which is not the norm. And usually when men are raised in that kind of environment, and if you have a toxic masculine figure as your father, you're going to grow up pretty much hating women, and that's going to show in the way that you treat women. And that's not something that I saw in Nick's character at all.
Yeah. He defended his mom to Wharton when he was like, oh, she worked in a diner, and a woman, I forget what he said, but
A woman cooking for other people and not for her family, or something like that.
Yeah, would never want to do that rather than taking care of their own family or something like that.
Yeah, and then he said, well, she liked her job.
Yeah.
So
he's very compassionate about his mom even after she left.
I know. Why did they give us, like, let's give us some more sympathy for this character.
Yeah, let's make him more sympathetic and then throw him into a gutter. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have thought he would be a piece of shit, because obviously, like, my mom left me. Like, that's the first abandonment issue that men have with women.
Yeah.
And he does not treat women like that
at all.
Like, if he was a true believer of the sense of Jacob and the traditional mentality, he would be a dick. And he's not.
He's kind to all women, including even when it makes us uncomfortable, like with Serena.
Exactly.
And when we're like, are you sure though? You're gonna be nice to her too? I mean, I get it. Being nice to all women, but like, come on now.
Seriously.
Yeah, I think Kate mentioned that about Serena in our last recording. I mean, we've said that many times about
fucking Serena.
Yeah.
One of the things that has bothered me after obviously watching the finale was that we got this amazing male character carved out for 5.5 seasons, in which obviously taken away that he joined the regime. We've discussed that. I'm not going to get into that. But Nick is a feminist man, and we don't get men like that in media. What's usually catered to us, it's a typical toxic masculine man that's devoted to the woman. And we see that in Luke. That's why Luke tracks with so many women, because he waited, allegedly, because, there were things that we weren't shown in the show. So that could be one of the things that we didn't get to see.
95%.
Or it could have been from June's perspective, and maybe June has rose-tainted glasses as well with Luke. And usually, we see a man that's devoted, and that's what we subconsciously want. And what we do is we brush off his red flags. And for me personally, Luke is a walking red flag, especially in the way that we have seen that he has addressed women in the past in the show. I know we've discussed this before. Usually women see that devotion, and I think that subconsciously and sometimes consciously, that's what we have been programmed to want, or even to see as true love. And that's usually what the patriarchal programming system does with the media. That's what we have been bombarded with for years in movies, stories, and so forth.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have Nick, who was also devoted to June in a completely different manner. But the only thing that people seem to see is that he joined the Sons of Jacob. And even though he did join the regime, they completely ignore that Nick never showed that he believed in the values that the Sons of Jacob upheld in terms of the way that he treated women. He never acted in a toxic masculine way against any woman, including Serena. For me, he was flawed, like everyone on the show, including our protagonist, who becomes the hero of her own story, but she's not supposed to be a superhero. And that's kind of like how she ended in season 6, and it made her unrelatable to me.
Yeah, she's gotten totally unrelatable.
And what I liked was that Nick was supposed to be her ally. He wasn't trying to save her, and we weren't expecting Nick to be the hero of the story. We know this is the Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
But he was trying to help her to survive. He protected her without being overbearing, and that's one of the things that I like the most.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they shed on that to end up with this one dimension idea that, guess what, girls, you were just blinded by the good guy routine. No, I'm sorry, excuse me. Nick isn't the cool guy in the office everyone loves, and then we come to find out he was an asshole to his girlfriend. That for me is Luke. We ended with this idea that men cannot be flawed and be good, even when they make mistakes. And I really don't like that message in the story.
Yeah, agree.
Definitely.
That's my rant.
Love it. Love a good rant. Yeah, it's what we've always seen all these seasons through the show, and what we thought they were trying to say. Like, they were trying to contrast the two men in this way.
Yeah, I don't think they were portrayed the way that they were portrayed by accident.
Right.
Like, I don't think this was an accident. Like, I think Luke was portrayed, and don't get me wrong, Luke is not a bad man. That's not what I'm trying to say. But he does represent that subtle misogyny that most men unfortunately have. And throughout the seasons that tracked in the book.
Right.
Like with Nick, even though I know Nick was a little different in the book, I thought the essence was going to stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it didn't.
Yeah. So Rachel is actually here to talk more about Nick and Luke. So she has some comments contrasting them, and also just about Luke's character.
There seems to be a common misconception from both the fandom as well as from those involved with the show that the reason why many fans love Nick is because Max Minghella is attractive. Hopefully, if our podcast has illustrated anything clearly over hundreds of episodes, it should be that, at least for us, this has never been the case. We have gone into great detail with many, many examples from the show as to why we have always loved Nick's character. For me, my moment falling in love with Nick happened 2/3 of the way through season 2 in episode 9, Smart Power. I had never seen an example of such raw honesty and selfless love in my life. It was actually shocking to me that he was so honest with her when he stood to gain nothing in return. The reason I came to love Nick was due to his actions and not his appearance. There also seems to be misconceptions around why some fans do not like Luke as much. I'm sure each fan has their own reasons to back up their own preferences. But for me, overall, I have not been impressed with Luke as a partner for June. It has been a well-known criticism against Luke that he cheated on his previous wife, Annie. I don't necessarily like or condone cheating overall, but I also know that unfortunately sometimes relationships run their course, and sometimes people fall in love with someone else outside of their marriage. It happens. It wasn't the cheating that Luke did in and of itself that bothered me. It was his behaviors around the cheating. June and Luke first meet when June is trying to pick a winning picture to use on her Tinder profile, as they are all in line at a hot dog vendor. Luke helps pick a picture and they flirt, but June notices he's wearing a wedding ring. We next see Luke and June on a secret lunch date. June admits she hasn't told Moira about their lunches, and Luke admits he hasn't told Annie. We also have to assume that since June and Luke did not exchange numbers when they first meet, the only way this affair could have started was if Luke then went on Tinder himself to track June down. During the lunch date we see, I have to admit Luke's behavior set off multiple red flags for me that probably would have turned me off had I been sitting across from him. First, when he admits that he hasn't told Annie about their lunch dates, he's incredibly calm. This doesn't seem to bother him. He doesn't seem to feel guilty. He does not seem to experience any crisis of conscience at all. Red flag. Then he makes a particularly gross remark asking if June and Moira ever hooked up when they were in college. Gross and red flag. While I'm glad that June at least calls him out on such a ridiculous question, especially when he throws in that "in my experience," and she calls him out saying, "Your experience as a lesbian? As a college girl?" However, that is probably where I would have gotten up, paid for my half of lunch, and noped out of there completely grossed out. But that's just me. Then they are married, and the timeline has progressed past the terrorist attacks on Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court. Martial law has been enacted, and June has lost her job and all of her money, as well as her right to own property, only because she's a woman. In fact, all women can no longer work, have money, or own property. We see Luke mildly affected by this. He shakes his head, but reassures June, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you." Fortunately, this scene is intended to show not only how patronizing Luke is, June and Moira explicitly say this, but also how unalarmed he is that this is happening to the women. People often accuse Nick of being complicit in Gilead, but in his own way, Luke was also being complicit to what was happening to the women around him, including his wife. I also want to point out that Luke's complicity was more of a personal choice, while Nick's complicity has always been a part of what he's had to do to survive living in Gilead. But Luke wasn't outraged on June's behalf. By saying, "I'll take care of you," he was implying that he would be a man and take care of his family. Only he doesn't. If he really wanted to take care of June and Hannah, he would have seen this as the threat it already was, that women were already under attack and being targeted by the society they were living in. Yes, things had happened gradually, but after the attacks on the government and martial law already being enacted, June losing her rights only because she was a woman should have been the tipping point for Luke to get out. That was the moment when he should have acted, if not before. But the truth was, it wasn't impacting him directly yet. And he still felt he was in a position to take care of his family as the man. So he waited until it was clear he was about to lose his family before making the attempt to leave. In this way, I have always seen Luke as representing a normalized version of a man influenced by the patriarchy. We see this same lack of awareness or urgency from Luke as late as season 5, episode 10, when June becomes alarmed at how the refugees are being treated in Canada and expresses her fears and desire to leave. She says they waited before and she doesn't want to wait again. Even after everything Luke and his family have gone through, Luke still says in this moment, "Canada is not Gilead," to which June says, "America wasn't Gilead until it wasn't." This was a moment when Luke's character could have shown growth, but apparently Luke still hasn't learned anything from his previous inaction prior to Gilead overtaking America. By the way, just before this scene in season 5, episode 10, June wakes from a nap and hears arguing between Luke, Moira, and Rita downstairs. They are arguing because the man Luke beat up has died, and there will be a warrant out for Luke's arrest for manslaughter. Instead of respectfully explaining this to his wife, when June comes downstairs asking what is going on, he actually tells her to go back upstairs. I'm sorry, but this felt way too similar to all the times Serena had ordered June to go to her room while she was a prisoner in Gilead. Were we not supposed to read this that way? There are also many examples of Luke being unfair, rude, and disrespectful towards others. He yells at Annie on her voicemail after Annie had approached June. Annie was the victim in that situation. She was in pain. Luke was responsible for that pain, and the way he treated her was unnecessarily cruel and disrespectful. While Nick wasn't married when he got together with June, he was already involved in what appeared to be a friends with benefits relationship with Beth, a Jezebel's Martha. Nick respectfully and kindly turns Beth down when she attempts intimacy with him, calling off their arrangement out of respect for both June and Beth. He even brings fresh herbs from Serena's garden to Beth, who was an award-winning chef in her previous life, as a simple act of kindness and friendship. Another caveat regarding Nick and Beth that I have always appreciated and also speaks to Nick's character with regards to his relationship with June. I have occasionally heard some fans indicate on social media that they think the only reason Nick slept with June was because it had, quote unquote, been a while for him, and he was only interested in June for sex. Nick already having a casual and relatively safe outlet for sex with Beth prior to June dismisses that argument. Nick was a survivalist, as has been well established. He knew sleeping with the handmaid in his own household was about the riskiest thing he could do. The only reason Nick would take such a risk is if there was already real feelings involved on his side. In season 3, episode 2, a very drunk Luke becomes extremely rude with Emily, who has just arrived in Canada and still has not been ready to reach out to her wife yet. Luke makes Emily's situation about himself and is offended on behalf of Emily's spouse that she has not yet done so. Luke may be drunk here, but I think this is only breaking down his inhibitions to express how he really feels. Luke does not understand how difficult this is for Emily and projects his personal feelings onto her situation. In other words, if June got out but wasn't ready to see him yet, he would be upset instead of trying to understand that as a trauma victim, June may need to do things at her own pace and in her own time. She may need space and she may need to take things slowly, but whatever she chooses should be on her terms, not Luke's. After June gets out of Gilead in season 4, we begin to see more of Luke's impatience with her and his selfish behavior, primarily focusing on how hard this is on him. For example, June asked Luke not to go to her testimony. The official reason she gave him may have been that she didn't want him to have to hear all that. But even Moira tells him June may not want a cheering section for this, as it was already going to be difficult for her to do. Luke goes to her testimony anyway, and the look on June's face shows how unhappy she is that he didn't honor her wishes. And then, after the testimony over dinner, Luke apologizes for going, but says that now he knows everything and maybe they can move on. And he breaks down crying, and we see June, the trauma victim, comforting him. This moment with Luke had nothing to do with what he heard at her testimony. It was not Luke being upset because of what June has gone through. It was Luke being upset because of how difficult this was on him. In season 5, episode 9, after the attempt to raid Hannah's school fails and the planes are shot down, and June is enraged after an upsetting phone call with Commander Lawrence, June begins to tear up her own garden in a rage. When Luke comes outside and forces June into a vice-like hug, June says, "Let me go," twice, and he does not do so. Because June is a former rape victim, I was bothered by Luke forcing comfort in this way instead of respecting her bodily autonomy when she asks him to let her go. By comparison, Nick's instincts with June always seem to be much more in tune with reading her body language. For example, in season 1, episode 6, when June abruptly enters Nick's apartment in a rage because she had lied to the Mexican ambassador by saying she was happy, Nick tries multiple ways to calm her down and comfort her. He verbally tells her she didn't have a choice. Then he tries to embrace her for physical comfort, but June flinches. Nick backs off, reading her body language. He offers her water, and as he goes to get it, he is also giving her the space she needs to collect herself and calm down. This is the moment when she tells him her real name. When he responds with, "It's nice to meet you, June," treating this as meeting her for the first time, his calmness and acceptance of her true identity finally allow Nick the opportunity to embrace June with a kiss on the forehead and a hug for comfort. He waited until she was ready to receive his comfort before he gave it. In season 4, episode 6, when June is on the boat out of Gilead as she finally escapes and makes her way to Canada, she is riddled with anxiety over seeing Luke again and is remembering the doubts she had entering into their relationship because she worried he may leave her one day like he did Annie if it turns out she isn't what he wants. In one of her flashback memories, she has an argument with Moira, and June is trying to defend her relationship with Luke, saying that he and Annie used to fight all the time, and we never fight. First of all, occasional fights are healthy in a relationship, and second, if a couple never fights, then someone is always backing down. It simply isn't possible for a couple to always agree on everything in perfect harmony at all times. Also with Luke in season 5, episode 8, June and Luke do have a big fight over whether June should go to New Bethlehem to be closer to Hannah. In this fight, June finally says to Luke how she really feels, which she had been holding back, accusing him of having done fucking nothing for 7 years. Yet in this instance with Luke, she immediately apologizes to him rather than owning how she really feels. This is a submissive side of June that only seems to be present in her relationship with Luke and is disappointing to see after she became so incredibly strong and empowered while she was a prisoner in Gilead. By comparison with Nick, not only have they had fights, but June seems to come alive in her fights with Nick. She doesn't cower. She even becomes an irrational and stubborn version of herself when she fights with him. Their fight in season 2, episode 2 is probably the best example. June wants to leave and find Hannah and go north to get out, seemingly right that second. Nick is trying to reason with her because what she wants to do will get them killed. Nick is completely right and June is completely wrong. However, when she demands he give her his keys, if he won't go with her, he relents and gives her the keys. He even doubles down and gives her his gun. He knows if June does this, it's a death sentence for both of them. He is giving June his only means of transportation and protection in the hopes that she will come to her senses on her own and change her mind. But ultimately, the message behind his action here is, I will not hold you prisoner, you are safe with me. This is a pattern Nick learned with June. She may get upset and even irrational, but if he gives her the space she needs, she comes around and they can come back together. Other examples of this are in season 3, episode 3, when Nick visits June to tell her he is being deployed and he wants to say goodbye. She is mean and cold at first, but he leaves and waits outside the door until June has a change of heart, opens the door, takes his hand, and leads him inside. On the bridge in season 4, episode 3, at first Nick tries to apologize after what just happened, but she stops him because she gets it, and also she's upset and needs him. She cries, and he senses she needs his comfort and wants it. She is extremely upset after her recent encounter with Hannah. Nick gives her words of comfort and love. She breaks from him, walks away. Then, realizing this is possibly the last time they may ever see each other, she turns, runs back, and kisses him. In season 6, episode 3, once Nick agrees to go to the water park to help Luke and Moira, June immediately tries to join him. Nick protests because this is too dangerous. He doesn't want her to go. But instead of an argument, June just waits, looking at him. Nick relents, letting her come, knowing that it's futile to argue. Despite my displeasure with how the Nick and June relationship was handled after season 6, episode 6, I appreciate the fact that this moment of progress and growth in this particular pattern of their relationship was given to us in this amusing moment between them. While it is true that Luke does not seem to do much while he is in Canada, and June and Hannah are prisoners in Gilead, that fact that he doesn't try to go in after them to rescue them never bothered me. I never saw Luke as a fighter, and frankly, I never thought Luke would last a day in Gilead. We see in season 5, episode 6, when June and Luke have been captured and Luke makes a reckless choice to try and rush the guards and fight back, and they beat him up. And we see again in season 6, episode 5, that Luke tries to explain or argue with a guardian and he gets punched. Luke just doesn't have the instincts to comply in order to survive. My final comparison between Nick and Luke comes down to one pretty significant thing: chemistry. What has always been lacking for me the most about the relationship between June and Luke is their overwhelming lack of chemistry. In early seasons, when we saw flashbacks to her marriage with Luke, I would describe them as a I'll take your word for it relationship. OT and Elizabeth are both great actors, but they could not convince me of this relationship. I just never felt it. They don't spark, they don't have heat. I just don't feel the love between them. The chemistry between Max and Lizzie, and by extension Nick and June, has been overwhelming from the first episode. And the overwhelming proof of the significance of this difference between the two couples is in how fans have responded to both couples throughout the 9 years this show has been on the air. And I am not referring to whether fans are Team Nick or Team Luke. That was created by the show, not the fandom, despite what some may think. The fact is, the character of Luke was presumed to be dead in the original book by Margaret Atwood, and Luke is killed in front of the Handmaid character named Kate in the made-for-TV movie. The TV show made the choice to resurrect Luke's character, and the only reason they would do that is to have this love triangle as a central part of the story. What I mean by how fans have responded to both couples comes down to which couple has inspired the most engagement of fans to create communities and art. In this case, it's safe to say the numbers don't lie. If you look up the primary established Facebook pages for each couple, the numbers are staggering. Team Nick and June has over 16,000 members. Facebook groups stopped giving exact numbers, over 1,000. And the Team June and Luke page has 253 members total. If you search for fan fiction on Archive of Our Own, Nick and June currently have 361 stories, while June and Luke have about 2 official stories specifically dedicated to their relationship. On Tumblr, the Nick and June tag has 1.1 thousand followers, compared to literally no one following a Luke and June tag. I tried searching. The Luke and June tag didn't even seem to exist. And it would be impossible to know the number of actual fan videos made for Nick and June on YouTube, but there are easily hundreds, if not thousands. The only videos I've found for June and Luke are clips from the show, but I'll be generous and say there might be a couple that were fan-made. This isn't to say that Luke and June and Luke's relationship don't have their fans. Fans of Nick and June know they do because we've engaged in plenty of discussions over the years on social media. But the Luke and June relationship doesn't seem to inspire fans to form communities where they can connect with others over how much they love it, or a podcast where they can connect with others over how much they love it. And their relationship doesn't seem to inspire the emotions that lead to creating art as a tribute to their relationship. What tends to drive those who prefer Luke and June seems to be more based in practical or objective facts, like he's her husband, he waited for her, etc. I'm not making these comparisons to be mean or petty. It is just a fact that the fan base has not responded to Luke and June as passionately as they have to Nick and June, which is what makes the way this show ended the series feel like even more of a betrayal to the fans when this season had previously been described as a love letter to the fans. It makes me wonder what kind of love letters the showrunners got growing up. Were they made out of cut-out block letters from magazines like a ransom note or written in dripping blood? In any case, I think they may have underestimated the amount of fans who would ultimately find the conclusion they chose for this series to be, quote unquote, satisfying.
It's ironic that, it's a love letter to the fans, yet, if we can talk a little bit about was season 2, right? When Nick delivers, the letters, and then this season, the letters were kind of like what fucked him over.
Yeah.
And the love letter to the fans, at least I felt fucked over.
That's accurate. Yes. I mean, honestly, where did the letters go in season 6? Like, where are they?
Well, June had them,
but like, where did she leave them? What happened to them?
I don't know. Maybe they went in the Boston Globe Memorial. It's another way to fuck us. Fantastic.
Maybe I just feel like it's so weird that they never came up again, right?
Never. Like, I mean, they didn't have the impact, obviously, that the letters in season 2 did, because a lot of people started loving Nick after seeing that episode, especially I think Rachel talks about that,
Yeah, exactly.
when he brings back the vocal love letter that Luke tells him in that bar to June, word for word. I mean, that was pretty awesome. But then, that comes full circle in season 6. And what we got was just like, well, because he went to get the letters for June, he's seen, he gets shit on, and then
Yep.
we know what happens.
Yeah, we do unfortunately know what happens there. Yeah.
That's so fucking horrible.
Well, thanks, Rachel, for
Your thoughts?
laying all of that out for us. Like, it was well thought out. Yeah. Excellent. So now we're going to hear from Sarah some of her thoughts about politics and history from her perspective.
So I don't really want to go into today's politics because, as we all know, it's really depressing for the most part. Although I am reasonably certain that the way Nick's story ended was directly or indirectly caused by Donald Trump and the entire MAGA movement. So the showrunners probably unwisely wanted to use Nick, who was a big fan favorite, to send a message. So what I'd like to go into today is a well-known historical event and the meaning of survivalism, which was also one of Nick's defining traits, at least to me, and why survivalism itself is not something that deserves to be judged, despite the writers clearly disagreeing with me. So to put this in context, I come from the happiest country in the world, Finland, and I would say that the essence of our entire existence has been survivalism for about a century. Today, we're a small country of 5.5 million people, right next to Russia, and that often leaves us with difficult political choices. In our history, no country or organization has ever been willing to sacrifice anything to help us in our hour of need. So therefore, we have learned to count on just ourselves, although today we are a member of the European Union and NATO. But those are much newer things than what I'm going to talk about here. So in 1939, we were attacked by the Soviet Union with no provocation, and the entire world, they just watched in horror and, of course, condemned what happened. And there were a lot of individuals who came here to help, but there was no national army of any country that did, because it was believed that we would not survive for very long. And let's just be honest here and admit that the destiny of Finland wasn't really that important to anyone except for us.
And of course, at this point in 1939, the Soviet Union and the UK and the US were not allies yet. And Finland was a young democracy. We had actually gained our independence in 1917. So we were still relatively new. And we were quite a poor country back then, not a very industrialized one. But still, we were a democracy. And Finland was not fascist. Finland was not Nazi. So later on in World War II, I believe this was in 1941, the United States and Britain, and of course France, they aligned themselves with the USSR. That was still Finland's enemy. So we realized that we were pretty much alone. And we found ourselves in a situation where the only country willing to help us, for a price, of course, was Nazi Germany. So Finland ended up aligning itself with Nazi Germany. And this is not something that should be denied in any way. It has to be looked at as a fact, but you also need to look at the context, which is what I'm trying to explain here. We allowed them to access Soviet lands through Finland, mostly in Lapland and the north of Finland. And we received weapons and food, and especially when we came close to the end of the war. It was really important because we were very much out of all resources, and a lot of Finnish men had been in the military for years at this point. So we didn't have a lot of food, and we were running out of weapons. And if you're wondering what happened to Finnish Jews since we were allied with the Nazis, well, the answer is nothing really. Finnish Jews were in the Finnish army, just like anybody else would have been. They were our people. Our government protected them. And for the most part, apparently, even the German soldiers let them alone in the front when they met them. And if they didn't, then they usually had comrades from the Finnish army who would come to their defense. And that was actually the entire heart of the matter here. We want to protect our people and to remain independent. We were not there to save the world. We were not there to bring down the entire Soviet Union by ourselves or bring down Nazi Germany by ourselves, although they did a lot of really, really horrible things, some of which I would say that our government was aware of, and some of which it wasn't. But even then, I would say that most Finns were not aware of these things. And we didn't ally ourselves with the Germans just to do anything else but to survive. In 1944, when we were near the end of the summer, Finland's alliance with Nazi Germany came to an end because that's what we decided. And the reason was that we saw that they were no use to us anymore. They were going to lose the war. And if we continue to align ourselves with them, we were going to get really badly beaten eventually. And things were going to be even worse for our nation. There really wasn't much hesitation in doing this, at least not morally, because that was what the entire alliance was about. It was about getting what we wanted and what we needed to survive. It was not about us wanting to aid Nazism or somehow being loyal to it. And actually, Hitler was actually really pissed that we turned on them. I've read some books that said that he just wouldn't stop talking about how the Finns betrayed Germany or whatever. So he was really pissed off. So I think that when it comes to Nick, that was the entire point of his behavior as well, to survive. You don't survive a war with no blood in your hands, but that doesn't make you a corrupt person, an evil person, a Nazi, or a bad person. Nor does it mean that all your good deeds are now meaningless. So my point here is that sometimes you have no good alternatives, especially if you're a small-time operator, like a small country, or an individual like Nick. Survivalism is not pretty, and sometimes it requires compromising your own morals. But if you want to, you're welcome to come to my country and see that sometimes it's really worth it. And to conclude this, I would say that one of the reasons so many people loved Nick was that he was a realistic character, very much imperfect in his own way. I don't think anybody, or at least any of us, ever saw him as this perfect love interest or perfect hero or a perfect man. But this is exactly what you'd expect from a show like this. Imperfection and great characters. But now, after how The Handmaid's Tale ended, I feel like the showrunners are sending the message that being anything but somebody who's willing to sacrifice everything, including their own life, for the so-called greater good, is unacceptable, and it means that you deserve to be eviscerated and your memory erased entirely. Well, fortunately, this is not how people's memory works for the most part. So I don't think this is really going to work very well for them. But we shall see.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't know a lot of that history, so it was really good to hear your perspective on that. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the show has done a turn from a, like you said, gray, complex look at the intricacies of all of this and how it affects different people in different situations. And now it's gotten very black and white all of a sudden, which feels like a very sharp turn from what we thought they were trying to say before.
Exactly. I always felt that we were supposed to look at just about everyone in the show as having both good and bad in them, but now I feel like they wanted to, how would I put this? Like, you see the polarization in the US and how it has grown.
Mm-hmm.
I think they wanted to put this into the mix and just basically show that, yes, we agree with you who say that everybody who supports Donald Trump is bad. Like, I'm not saying I necessarily whether I agree or disagree with that, but the thing is that Handmaid's Tale is not real life. But the way they started the show, I think they wanted to, or at least I used to think that they wanted to have some kind of realism in there and what it's really like to live in a totalitarian regime.
Mm-hmm.
But now I feel like they really forgotten all about that, and it's all about simplifying things right now.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's a really strange message to send.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think it makes sense to look at any situation that way, like, oh, you did XXX, therefore you are, it takes the humanity out of people. And I mean, how are we supposed to be able to communicate with each other if we just say you're on one side of this and I'm on the other and we don't have any common ground? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's also not a great message because it makes people feel like there's no reaching people on the other side of an argument, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it also dehumanizes the others.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It dehumanizes the people you disagree with. And that's really not that's actually a terrible sign for any country because it usually means that eventually leads to a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a smart person, if you're a smart politician, somebody who has some influence in public, that is something that you should not stoke because that kind of hatred, it leads to violence.
Yep.
Eventually, whether it's in a year or 5, 10 years.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you can feel that here. We've felt that for years now, just the tension of like, is it going to go that way? So, yeah. And I know in a lot of other places all over the world feeling that as well. So,
yeah. I feel like if Trump hadn't been the Republican candidate last year, I feel like things could have gone in a different direction.
Yeah.
Maybe they wouldn't have felt the need to take a stand like this. But who knows? It's just my guess at this point, of course, since we don't know the background and when all of this was actually planned.
Right. Just trying to make sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, it has to have something to do with what's been going on in the U.S. And I feel like it's also. I don't personally like it when you take a political stand in a show and it's extremely U.S. centric, and so you forget all the intricacies of politics in other countries where things may still be quite different, and where you can actually form coalitions even with people you disagree with, and even if you can't form a coalition with them, you'll still talk to them, you'll still work with them, you still see them as people.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the individual and what is this person like. Okay, you can look at their opinions, of course, and you should, but you judge people as people.
Yep.
Not as someone, oh, he's a member of this and that party, he's a Nazi or commie or whatever.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. Yep. And I think the book was more world aware, right? I mean, it wasn't so US focused in the book as it seems like the show has gotten, like you're saying, right? I know that she did a lot of research about what was going on in other countries to come up with the story.
Yeah, I think she had like Iran in there. That was one of the countries I think that she used as an example or as an inspiration for the book. But these regimes with totalitarian or fascist leaders have always existed. There's always been at least one of them in the world. So it's not exactly new.
Right.
So I feel that that's one of the reasons that I really wish that the showrunners had taken a broader approach to the entire topic and actually done more research around the world, just like Margaret Atwood did.
Yes, definitely.
Rather than just look at, oh, here's the situation in the US. This is really going to pay us off to take our stand on this.
Right.
Maybe, but when you look at it from a broader perspective, it just doesn't look good.
Yep. Well, thank you for that. That was very insightful.
Thank you.
So I'm not a professional writer by any means. None of us are. But I do know a central tenet of writing is show, don't tell. If you have to tell me something happened that I didn't see, it's not a good story. You're not doing a good job with your storytelling process. You're not being true to the narrative you're telling. If you have to explain over and over again in interviews why the decisions you made were the right ones, which is why it's crazy that in all these interviews we were being told insane things, like this quote from Yalin Chang, where she says, for Nick to have risen to be part of the Gilead power regime, to be an eye from the beginning, all the way to being a commander, he has done some bad things. We haven't shown them, so it was convenient to forget. Or from Eric, who said, Nick rose from being a driver and an eye to a commander, and 95% of his time is not spent with June. What's he been up to in Gilead? And then there was another quote from Bruce where he said, part of Nick's backstory is that he was very involved in Gilead's version of January 6th. He's considered one of the OG people who wasn't going to be forgiven by the US or Canadian governments. So let's just think about this. So there's a lot that's very wrong with all of these quotes in relation to telling a consistent story and not betraying your audience. So let's just stop and think about it, especially that first quote from Yalin. He's done so many bad things. We didn't show them. So it's understandable you forgot. You guys hear what's crazy about that, right?
Yeah, we're supposed to remember things that never happened.
Right.
Yeah.
There's nothing for us to forget. We didn't see it, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. So, okay, we certainly saw Nick make some not so great decisions. I will agree with that. And the time we spent with him on the show, I'm not saying he was a saint, but every quote unquote bad thing we saw him do was because he was backed into a corner. He had no choice.
It was also softened, like every single decision he made, it was softened by the writing.
Yes.
There was also always a reason for him to make that decision.
Right.
Some kind of reason that actually made it seem a little bit better for the audience. So why do this if the entire purpose of the show has been to show Nick as a villain?
Right. And the point of it is you don't get to after the fact tell me that he was apparently taking shifts at the killing puppies and kittens factory in the 95% of the time we didn't see him, or that he was actually part of Gilead's version of January 6th. It's inconsistent. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no one mentioned any of this ever.
No one mentioned of that, right? So we didn't know what he was up to 95% of the time. That's true. You are making a factual statement. Correct. But I don't think it was a far leap for us to then fill in those blanks using the knowledge we had been provided along the way, knowing what we knew about Nick. If you're having to come in after the fact and explain it to me, that means you didn't do your job correctly. You're writing an inconsistent story. And we're not wrong for making the interpretations we did about him and his character. And, just the blatant, gaslighting almost and insistence that, no, actually, he was actually going to be a Gilead loyalist is almost it's insulting, actually, kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
To us as viewers, that it's almost you didn't interpret it correctly. It was no, I interpreted what I saw. You didn't do a good job telling a story. That's what it boils down to.
And if you think about it, especially what Bruce said, January 6th happened it was 2021, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
That was years later than we saw the first seasons of the show.
Yeah, I think he's saying a version of that, right? He's saying the Gilead version of it, or yeah.
But if he was in any way inspired by what happened for real back then, I still say that there were no signs of Nick being anything like that in the first seasons. And the thing is, if you take inspiration from a real life event that happens years after your show has started, that can be a very problematic decision, because in order to make this political point, you may have to change the essence of one of your characters entirely, especially if you choose to use a main character or an original character to do that.
And an established character.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like this was about collecting political points, cheap political points.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. And then, like, another quote I had from Bruce was, and this just goes to more of the inconsistencies. He said, Nick's fantasy life came to life with June for a little while, and now he has very little time for a fantasy life, and his real life is really complicated, and he spends all this time thinking about how to keep himself safe for his family. It's changed him in a way with his priorities. So it's very sad, but I do think it was inevitable for him, if he's going to be a stand-up guy, that he would be a stand-up guy for his on-the-way son. So this is in reference, obviously, to him choosing to get on the plane at the end. And again, I say, when did we see this? Sarah, you were talking about, like, they betrayed, like, stuff from, like, seasons ago. Like, it's clear, like, none of them went back and, like, rewatched the series before they wrote this season. But, like, this is something that was literally, what, like, 4 or 5 episodes ago? Like 13 minutes in the show canon ago this happened, that he came in telling June they should go to Paris. She was the one that said, what about Rose? And what did he say? I'm no good for them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're telling me it was inevitable that Nick, who was fully prepared to leave them behind, was just all of a sudden going to commit to the Gilead bit and go all in? Like, I understand, like, he felt like he lost June or whatever, after what happened. But then that goes back to June being unable to forgive him for this betrayal that was actually not a betrayal, because, again, he didn't know those women were going to die, and they act like that's the hill they can't get over. He didn't know that was going to happen.
Well, not to mention the fact that I don't see any version of Nick from the past reacting this way to, in quotes, losing June, because she went to Canada. He already, like,
that's true,
thought she was going back to her old life and knew that she was with Luke. And of course he acknowledges the way he feels about that in episode 3 of season 6 in a way that is very vulnerable and true to his character still, because I think that was valid for him to say those things to her. But as we said in that discussion, he doesn't ask her to change that. He's not trying to force her to make a different decision. He's just telling her how he feels, which is fair for anyone to do.
Right.
So losing June, in quotes again, is not something that I think he would react any way like this to that being on the table.
Exactly. And as far as Nick's love or concern or whatever for his Gilead family goes, like you already said, Tina, he was totally willing to leave them just a few episodes before being blown up in a plane. And the thing is that when you look at Nick's actions, his expressions, his behavior over the last couple of seasons, even, for example, in the finale of season 5, I don't really see anything pointing to him loving or truly caring that much about his Gilead family. And I'm sorry to say this, but as Tina already said, Nick wasn't a saint. And I think one of his so-called flaws was that he wasn't able to truly love anybody except for June and their daughter. And of course, I think it's understandable in the environment that he lived in, because just about all marriages, or at least most of them, are probably not truly voluntary or true love matches. And I have never, ever seen Nick's love for Rose or Nick's love for his unborn child with Rose. It just didn't exist on screen.
Yeah. I mean, he has care for them, and I think he feels a responsibility for them, but it's not in a passionate love, I made this choice kind of way.
Yeah.
To me, it felt kind of similar to, not exactly the same, obviously, but kind of similar to Eden, where obviously he didn't want anything bad to happen to her. And when she met, her end, obviously in the horrible way she did, he felt very bad about that. He felt sympathetic, like, I could have changed, I could have done better. But he was, short-sighted by his love for June. And like I said, he's not a saint, but, I do think ultimately he always tried to do the best for everybody he could. And I know I don't see it. Like, it's just, you just made a decision at the end to suit what you wanted to do without, considering the narrative. And like, even Max, you read interviews from him talk about the show. Like, I've got one here So he says, I'm only reading scripts I'm acting in, so I wasn't fully conscious of this more malevolent side of Nick. So, like, even the actor playing the character is like, well, I wasn't fully aware that he was doing apparently all of these terrible things in Gilead, which, like, if he wasn't even aware of it, that speaks to a greater problem with the writing and the storytelling. If this was the plan all along for him to, for all men in Gilead to be evil, apparently, or not be worthy of redemption, which they have said that over and over again, too. Like, a commander in Gilead is just a commander in Gilead. They're full willing participants. Okay. Why was that direction not passed along to Max and said, hey, look, all Gilead commanders are kind of not so good, not so great people. So maybe play that a little differently, read that line a little differently, react to this a little differently, so we can see that underlying malevolence, as Max said. That was not done.
And that's another thing that I think we've spoken about a couple times in these episodes, that also is an inconsistency, because they're saying all commanders are bad in Gilead, and then they have Emily saying that she had a good commander in the final episode, and they have Lawrence going out in a heroic act. Like, you're only saying that because it applies to what you did to Nick.
Right.
And they're making that generalization of, like, all commanders are bad to try to explain why we should have seen that he was a villain, when simultaneously allowing other characters to be exceptions to that.
Right. And Eric even said, he also said in another quote, like I said, I've been collecting these like Pokemon cards, I guess, to talk about. He said they decided it was at the end, they wanted to take a very honest look at his character, and they decided they weren't going to idealize or romanticize Nick anymore. Which, like, again, if that's what you were doing the whole time, why not show that?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be because so many of us related to that and were drawn to the show for their relationship because of, the light and the darkness, all of that. Like, but they wanted to, I think, string us along through it so that we'd stick with it. Because otherwise they would have peppered this in sooner and made it more of a journey for his character to go on, of showing us this. But it's dumb, because we still would have followed it if it was well written.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have been upsetting for different reasons. It still would have felt
Right.
like a very crushing kind of way to take the story, but at least it would have made some sense.
Yeah. So another quote that I had saved, somebody brought up, I think it might have been Yulia, I can't remember, that in Bruce's interview with us, actually, let's look at us quoting ourselves. Look at that. Somebody asked Bruce about, did his mom die?
Nick's mom. Yeah.
Do we know? I don't think we ever found out. So we asking questions about his backstory, as like people are very curious about this character. Why did he end up here? Past what we saw in his one flashback, what was his life like? Because that gives a lot of context for why is he behaving the way he is in certain situations or what have you. But he says, the way you guys have to think about a show is, I know you like to think about it as there's a whole picture, but the way I think about it is I'm only showing you little dots of that picture. For you guys, I'm giving you illusion that there is a whole picture, but there is no picture. It's an illusion. Like I said, I'm by no means a professional writer, but I have written some stories. When I sit down to write I just feel like that to me indicates a level of care with storytelling that is not consistent with like a long form TV show like this. Because how can you write for a character consistently over the years without having some idea in your mind of what their life was like before the show, or what they're doing outside the scope of what we see?
Yeah.
He says, the problem is a lot of people, when they start out in TV, they try to figure out the whole world, like every single thing about it, but you don't have to. Which, I mean, I understand, like, you can't sit there and, like, obsess over every detail, like, where is this tree, and, like, what is this person's middle name? But I think you should, at a very basic level, like, what was their family situation like? What was their background? Where did they grow up? What is something they may have experienced that would shape the way they're going to interact with the world around them in the show you're building?
Yeah. I'm also not in any way, shape, or form a professional writer, but I did take a filmmaking course in high school. And one of the things that was our homework assignment each week was, on a Wednesday, we would have to come in with a character outline that would be a new character we'd created, with information about their backstory, their history, things that might not necessarily make it into a screenplay, but that were part of who this person was. And then on the Friday, we would come in with a pitch based on that character for a story. So the first step was determining who the person was, and the second step was determining what that would inform about the plot we were creating.
Right.
That seems like the logical progression to me.
Exactly. And then while we're discussing what Bruce said right there about Nick's mom. So we did hear about her in season 6, but what was the point of that? What was the point of that discussion either? I guess it could have been pandering to us, but the thing is that we never asked for any pandering. We wanted the show to stay true to its own canon, at least to its own canon, if not the entire book canon. But they just didn't achieve that. And I think that's what a lot of people have such a big issue with. So why bring these pointless things into the show, like Nick's mom, or even the flashback of Nick and June in his garage apartment? They didn't have to do that either. And in the end, it didn't really serve any sort of purpose, except that, okay, we can tell that Nick doesn't really think he's that good of a guy, but we already knew that.
Yeah.
Right.
So why show us that?
Yeah, I mean, and then the line that June says to him about being good, kind, and brave, and now they're painting him as a coward in some of the behind the scenes things.
Right.
It was in the inside the episode on Hulu that they said he chose cowardice or whatever. So it's like, why are we having an episode where June is confidently calling him kind and brave and then saying, no, he's been a coward? Like, are we trying to say that June is an idiot for not realizing that?
Yeah. I'm guessing that's the point.
Which means all of us, I guess, were. Yeah.
Well, like, even though, to your point, Aubrey, like, so we got good, kind, and brave in one episode. And then in episode 10, we get violent and dishonest. So which was it? And
what did June actually learn about him in those episodes that led her to change that dramatically on who he was?
Right.
I mean, really.
She learned that it was the betrayal, the Jezebel's, giving up the Jezebel's plot. But in episode 9, when she was talking to Wharton, when she was let out of her little, like, kennel or whatever it was, she said, I know you killed those women.
Right.
So to me, that says she understood it was not actually Nick that was responsible for it. It was Wharton.
Mm-hmm.
But she's still going to say Nick was violent and dishonest.
Well, and she still trusted him to have told her the truth about that, because she said that to, I've said this in episode 10 already, but like she said that to Wharton, like with confidence, and Nick was the only person who told her that.
Yeah.
Like she's basing knowing that Nick didn't have anything to do with it on Nick himself, and then calling him dishonest, even though she's fully trusting him in episode 9. Makes no sense.
I mean, the only thing I could think is, and this is even like a stretch, her seeing him getting on, like showing up at that hangar and getting on the plane was maybe her thinking, okay, well, and knowing that it was Warden on it and what that plane was, where it was going.
But that's also, it's a similar, I could sort of understand June being like that if there was commentary on that, because she does the same thing to Lawrence in episode, is it 6? 5? I think it's 5, when she's judging Lawrence for being at Jezebel's, even though she knows who he is. Like she does that.
Right.
She sees you in a position and she's like, oh, forget everything I knew about you. Now I'm judging you for this one thing you're doing, without thinking about the fact that there's a lot more complicated things going on behind the scenes because it's freaking Gilead.
So like the only thing I can think, like you said, is in her mind. She's like, I know this plane is full of like all these bad commanders that are going to DC to do whatever. He is getting on the plane, therefore he must be going to continue doing his violent and dishonest acts. But the dishonest line, like, first of all, we never saw him do anything, like, outwardly violent. I mean, yes, we did, but, like, not to anybody who didn't deserve it. Like, he shot Putnam, but, like, he was a creep. And also, I think that was more like him doing Lawrence's bidding anyway. So all of those things was not like it was his own free choice. Like, he didn't wake up that morning and say, you know what we should do? We should bomb Chicago. Like, Lawrence backed him into the corner to, like, carry out the order.
He wasn't some Nazi mastermind. Like, the brains behind all those evil ideas and evil plans.
Right.
In Gilead.
He was pushed to do things under extreme duress and survival.
And like those things, like, do I, like, every time anything like that happened, do I wish he would have said, no, I'm not doing that? Like, of course, I wish he had said, no, I'm not doing that. But I also have a brain that thinks and has empathy and compassion and can put myself in other people's shoes. And I could see why he would feel like he had to carry on, especially if he's trying to keep himself alive, to be there for June, to be there for Nicole, to be there for Hannah, like to keep, you know, like we know he was information gathering clearly back in season 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think even if we really wish that he'd said no at some point, I was reading a book earlier this year about totalitarianism and cults. And basically, it's a very noble idea for anyone to think, for any individual to think that they'd say no in a situation like Nick's. Because according to the book, around 90% of people would agree to do something bad just because their job was being threatened. Not even their life, but their job. And in Nick's case, it wasn't just about his job; it was about his life, because we know how Gilead used to act in the previous seasons.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a lot more interesting to show that perspective in Nick and show the real human consequences and decisions that you have to make, decisions in quotes, that you're forced to make under these conditions. But they apparently thought it was not worth exploring to the end.
Yeah, all of it just like, all of it goes back to is just like, they had a good foundation. And if they had paid attention to that foundation, they could have told a really good, compelling story using all of their characters. Instead of, it almost feels like Nick was the scapegoat, like for like all of Gilead. Even though, I would argue, I mean, I know the quotes that they say, again, goes back to the like, show me this, don't tell it to me, but they're having to tell us now because we never saw it. They say he was so integral to Gilead forming and all of that. So again, if that's what the story you wanted to write, fine, okay, I get it. But why did we have him start in season 1? Like one of the first lines June says about him is low status, hasn't even been issued a woman yet, right? So if he truly was this Gilead founder, mastermind, somebody that was so integral to it forming in the first place, why was he just a driver? Why was he just, an eye? If he truly was this person who he says he was that was not going to get any mercy, like he should have been a commander from the jump. I think another thing they forget, why did he become a commander?
Right.
It's just doing a disservice to your story to ignore the foundation you've laid. And then at the end, then it becomes a house of cards. And, then when you look at it too closely, the whole thing just falls apart because it's ignoring everything you've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And it just invalidates all of it.
Yeah, for sure.
I think they were hell bent on doing this to Nick, like come hell or high water, like this was going to happen.
I do think they said in the writer's room for season 6 was when they established this idea, but that was probably a very likely thing on the table.
Maybe.
Or something that they were considering at least. I don't know. It feels like a season 6
decision,
which seems like they said. Yeah.
It also doesn't help, I think, that they didn't know how long they were going to go. So then you have to kind of spin your wheels. The best way to tell a story is to start, like, I know this is where it starts, this is where it's going to end, and stay true to that the whole way to get there. So clearly that was not the case here. We know from Bruce, they decided to start doing season 6 and they were like, what can we do? Maybe we'll kill Nick, maybe we'll kill Lawrence. And again, I want to be clear. I obviously did not want him to die. It's not his death that I have a problem with. It's the manner in which it happened.
Exactly.
If he had just been able to die a noble death, if he had been able to die protecting, even if you want to reduce it back down to the only thing Nick cared about was June. And I think that's what they've done all this time. They've tried to say, well, Nick was actually never a good guy because all he cared about was June, which again, I say, what's the problem? Most people would only care about those that are closest to them, honestly, in a situation like that.
Yeah, at least when it comes to their own life being sacrificed at the expense of those people, or
right. Even if he had only died trying to protect June, it still would have meant something.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't mean anything. And that's what I feel is the biggest betrayal.
And I feel that after that, they could have still had June at least remember Nick fondly, but they didn't. They just wanted her to call him dishonest and violent. And as we already talked about, she hasn't actually seen him be either one of those things. So I feel like in the end, the entire storyline, the end of the Hicks storyline didn't really make sense. And it feels like it was engineered to humiliate the people who loved him. And we know there were a lot of people. So I get that a lot of people take this personally.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Sarah, I think you had a statement you wanted to make about the audience response to a writer's decisions.
Yes. So what I wanted to talk about was what happens when you write something or you make a work of art. I'm an avid reader, and I've also written my share of fiction, but I think I do know a little bit of something about what the relationship between a writer and the audience is, and how it can change in an instant when you make a mistake. So I guess my point is that when you write something, you don't really get to determine how the readers or the audience responds to that, and you don't really get to say who they get attached to, who they sympathize with, or who they hate. It could be very, very surprising, or it could be exactly as you intended it to be. But even if it's not, if the response is not what you intended it to be, that's not really a reason to dislike the audience, or think that you can just write anything you want in the future if you're still looking for your show to stay on air. Of course, it's impossible to please everyone when you're writing a show or a book or whatever sort of a work of art. But I think that especially if you're dealing with a large portion of the audience, you should think about what exactly they love about a character or a relationship, and look into the mirror and realize that for some reason, somehow, you are the person who made this happen. And even if you don't think it's a good thing, you still shouldn't string those people along or gaslight them with your writing, or then later on make them feel like you've insulted them in your writing. Those are just not the kind of decisions that a writer should make. And what you should also keep in mind is that your audience doesn't really owe you anything. Your readers don't owe you anything, because what you're making is commercial, and it means that you get paid to do it. And if truly staying on air or having your books published is what you want, then you don't get to make these decisions without actually thinking about your target audience. And I think that this was a call that I know was supported by Hulu, but in this case, I would say that they also made a mistake in allowing this to happen.
That's a really good point. It just made me realize, like, the decisions they make don't happen in a vacuum. They go out into the world and they can't control it. Like, it'd be one thing if you were writing a story for you, it wasn't going anywhere. You can do whatever you want at that point, but it's just a huge disservice to everyone, to the characters, to us, to the fans, to storytelling in general.
I think it's also just the fact that if they did see that it wasn't going over the way they wanted it to, and people were loving a part of the story that they didn't want you to love, or they didn't want that to be the focus of it, or whatever it is that they're trying to say, then course correct. If you want to change what people care about, make it flow, make it like lead us there somehow. Don't just say, you know what, actually, we're going to use those people for their feelings on this and continue to get commercial success, but also we don't want to tell that story. So at the end, we're going to pull the rug out.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like we've been used for them to make profit off of this story.
Exactly.
Because they know that this is the part of it that's bringing people to it. A lot of people. That the things that we're here for, that we've stuck with this journey for, are what's making them popular. So yeah, they have to pick a lane is what I'm trying to say, I guess. Either choose to support what you want to say and say it, or change course because you realize that the audience isn't going along with that. Pick a lane, but they decided not to pick a lane because they wanted to make money and also make a point and also insult us.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that if you have a lot of people right now saying that, oh, you didn't watch the show the right way. It was never about a love story. It was about revolution and women's rights, or just insert any other plot point except for the love story. And the problem just with that is that is what they showed on screen for a very long time. They showed us a love story. So these people, random fans, or even the writers, they don't get to say this show was never about the love story, because that is what they showed on screen. And they don't get to tell people what to love in a show. They don't get to tell people what to prioritize when they're watching a show. Nobody gets to do that.
And then at the end tell you, no, you watched it wrong, and actually all of this other stuff happened, but you didn't see it.
Yeah.
But it happened. Source, trust me, bro, is like, I didn't show you this, but we were just supposed to psychically divine all of this happened. Like,
yeah.
You
are supposed to know that this wasn't the point of the story.
Yeah, that's the vibe. It's very condescending. It's very patronizing, actually. No, actually, all this was going on, but sorry you didn't see it. You were actually wrong. Oops.
Yep. Okay, so that's a wrap for this week's episode. And we have one more meta episode coming out next week. So check back in with us on Tuesday. Thanks for listening.
Bye.